Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Urban Farmer Podcast. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Now let's jump right into it. It's a flashback, The Urban Farmer, as originally recorded 10 years ago with myself and farmer Curtis Stone. Welcome to The Urban Farmer, Week 15. It's June 23rd, and a lot of our focus so far during this series has been on the present. Mainly, it's been on the different marketing and growing techniques that Curtis uses to produce and sell vegetables in an urban environment. We've talked a bit in the past about how Curtis goes about finding new land to farm and how he structures his deal with his landowners, trading vegetables for land access. This has worked well for Curtis, and as a result, he's actively been farming for the last 5 years in the city of Kelowna. He's farmed 15 sites during that time, and he showed proof of concept. Sites have come and gone, but he's always tried to provide a net benefit to the homeowners. Mainly, they get vegetables, and they don't have to spend money and time maintaining their lawns. But there are other benefits as well.
I think that's a real sense of security for them. And it is for all my landowners that they know, these people are coming here all the time. They're looking after our place. It's comforting. So there's more value in just getting vegetables or even taking the burden off just managing the land off the owners.
Maintaining good relationships with his landowners has been one factor which has helped Curtis to build a lot of social capital, making it easier for him to find new farm plots. As a result, he doesn't actively prospect for new land to farm. But that wasn't always the case. So this week, we'll get into how Curtis went about getting his very first piece of urban farmland over 5 years ago. We will talk about what worked and what didn't work when he was just starting out and trying to gain access to land. The unique part here is this was all happening in the beginning, before Curtis had built any social capital from being an active urban farmer. There were no demonstration sites and no track record to refer to. It was only one person saying, "This is what I'm going to do. Are you interested in helping?" As you'll hear, Curtis eventually found his first piece of land to farm. That got the ball rolling, and from there, he never looked back. Speaking of gaining access to land, it's June 2015, and Curtis recently had a bit of unexpected land fall into his lap. He wasn't actively looking for land, so how did this all come about?
It was actually a plot that I've been farming for 5 years. They have a portion of it is a patch of lawn that the person living in the house uses to have their dog run around. But the dog is almost dead, basically. It doesn't run around much. So they just wanted to have a really small patch by the side of the house. So they asked if I wanted to expand the garden. I was like totally stoked because it was kind of a perfect timing because I would like to take on some more land, and looking for plots in mid-season isn't really something I want to do. So it was kind of just serendipitous. And so we, by expanding this plot, we're going to be able to get another 10 30-inch by 25-foot beds in there by taking out this one patch of lawn that they have. So it'll actually be great because it'll turn the plot into one big block, like just one square, whereas before it was sort of an L-shaped. There was a series of beds, 16 beds that were 25 feet long, and then another series of beds that are seven beds on the other side. So this is this big L. So now it'll just be this big open block, which will be great. We'll be able to produce a hell of a lot more stuff out of there.
It's pretty cool to know that you've been farming there for 5 years, and now they want you to take even more land, because I think people maybe hear about farming on other people's lands, and they're like, well, how does this work? How happy are the homeowners? And here's a case where they must be happy if you've been there for that long, and now they're asking you to take even more.
Oh, yeah, totally. And, yeah, they're great, too. This couple that own the house, their daughter lives in the house. They spend their winters in Mexico, and their daughter lives there full time. They run this family business together. Really great family. And they're away so much in the summer too. Like they probably pick up vegetables like half the time, because they just rather the land was used. That's their whole thing mostly. They're just like, we don't want to mow the lawn. We like how, we're coming there and taking care of the place, and it's a sense of security for them too, because I've been going there for so long that, I know who's in that house. If there was somebody there that didn't look like they were supposed to be there, I would know, and I would, maybe call the police or something if I saw something that I didn't, that didn't look like it was supposed to be there. And so I think that's a real sense of security for them. And it is for all my landowners, that they know, these people are coming here all the time. They're looking after our place. It's comforting. So there's more value in just getting vegetables or even taking the burden off, just managing the land off the owners.
In this 1,000 square feet that you're picking up, I know from talking to you previously, you're looking to get that into production really quickly. So how are you approaching the conversion of lawn to farm production? And is it different than you normally would do it if you were picking up this land in, say, September?
Yeah, it is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to try a little bit more of an aggressive strategy. So I'm going to just try something new. I always like to experiment with new techniques. And as far as the technique goes itself, it's not really that new. Essentially, what I'm going to do is what we've discussed before, is rent a sod cutter for half a day, strip the grass off, rototill the hell out of it, form out the beds, and instead of, what I would normally do is strip it off, till it, and then use a bit of time to bring up, so like the rhizomes from the grass would come to the ground, I'd till it again, and so on and so forth. I'd go through a 6-week phase, or I'd tarp it immediately and then leave it for a little while, then go back and till it again. I'm going to try just stripping the grass off, tilling it, forming the beds, putting in my soil amendments, and planting it immediately. But what I'm going to do is I'm only going to plant crops that can be covered with landscape fabric, with holes in the landscape fabric. So in this case, it'll be primarily Salanova, lettuce. So I'll just plant it out all Salanova, so that there'll be, grass might come back here and there, but it'll just be out of the holes of the landscape fabric. And that way it'll be a lot easier to manage, and allow me to get the plot into production quickly. So that's what we're going to try.
It's a cool little hack. You're basically substituting technology in the form of that landscape fabric for time that you don't have right now. Exactly.
That's the idea. The other thing too with this plot here for a long time, and right now it's got a lot of aphid pressure there. There's aphids getting into anything that's in the brassica family. So it's getting into turnips, it's getting into red Russian kale. If I plant arugula, it'll get into that. And so right now, one of my principal strategy for avoiding pests on my farm is to run away from the pests and plant the crops that the pests are going for at other plots. So that's what I've done here, is I'm kind of weeding this plot off brassicas for the season. So I haven't planted any more brassicas there. I think now we've got all the brassicas out of there. So all that this plot now is carrots, lettuce, we've got beet greens, we've got some beets. That's it. So I'm not going to put any brassicas there, and so until next year. And so I'm going to put those at other places. This way I don't have to, fight a problem, because at this time of year, like we discussed in a previous episode with my kale, we get these aphids getting into my kale, and then it's time to pull the kale out, it's happened earlier this year too, because it's been so hot. Also, demand for kale is down, like we discussed earlier. So just get rid of those crops, put something else in.
When you take on a new piece of land like that mid-season, how do you decide what you're going to put on it? So pest pressure is part of the decision, but you don't want to plant something now and then end up with a whole bunch of stuff that you can't sell. Is it just, like we talked about in a previous episode, you're trying to say, okay, what am I kind of at a deficit of that the market really wants, and I'm just going to go with that, knowing that odds are better than not that I can sell it?
As far as a marketing standpoint, this one particular plot, I'm just looking at what I have the most demand for, and that makes the most sense to expand that production. It also, I could put other things in there too, but if I want to get that plot happening this season and get at least one crop out of there, this is really the only way to do it. Another way to do it would be to use time and do the plot properly, and then I could put in a quick growing crop and maybe get one harvest there. Like if I spent the next 4 weeks getting that plot going, I could put some radish. Well, I wouldn't want to put radish in there because I've got the aphid pressure. So my only options there are just based on, well, for one, I've got the pest pressure, so I want to avoid that, and what makes sense to get a harvest for this season. And something like Salanova makes sense because I can start that in heads, or start that in soil blocks, mini soil blocks right now. Like as we speak, I can start that, and then I'll put those in the ground in 3 weeks, and then I will probably have that plot prepared by then. So then, boom, it's like that's planted out. It's going to be in production 3 weeks after that.
Okay, that makes sense. So now, this is kind of you working as a machine over 5 years into this. You've been on this plot 5 years. I think a lot of people wonder, how did you initially get land in the first place? So if you go back to when you just started this, can you talk about what was the process that you used to get land when you decided, hey, I'm going to go into this?
Well, the way I initially got land was from a friend of mine had his parents owned this home that had, it was like a double lot. One of the homes on the next lot burned down, and then they tore it out, and then it was just this vacant lot just filled in with clean fill. And it was a liability to them because they were managing weeds on it. They had to hire landscapers in there to clean it up all the time. And so when they heard about what I was looking to do, that I needed some places to grow some vegetables, they thought, hey, well, you could use this place because you could look after it. And so that's how I originally got my first piece of land. But that one particular piece of land was very visible to the neighborhood because it was all frontage. Like it was on a street, and then there was another street because it was a corner lot, and so it had a lot of frontage. So it just got a lot of people seeing it, and then people started asking questions. Next thing I know, I'm talking on the radio, I'm on blogs, I'm in the newspaper, and then I just started getting land offers left and right. And that was the best way to find land. I know that doesn't sound like something everybody can do, but it is. The best way to find land is to start with one particular place, make that place really happening, beautiful, productive, and then people will come to you, opposed to going and knocking on doors, at least in the urban context. If you're talking about acquiring land to lease in the traditional agricultural sense, rural or peri-urban land, there's other ways to go about doing that. But as far as acquiring urban land, it's really just best to have some kind of flagship plot that people will see, and then you'll garner interest from the community.
Yeah, that's that path of least resistance that you talk a lot about. Go with somebody you know, a family member, a friend that has it.
The low-hanging fruit.
Right. Was there anything you tried that first year that just didn't work when you tried to add on subsequent plots?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I went out and put up, I printed flyers, and I put them at health food stores and in any type of store like that would had a bulletin board that was sort of the demographic of people that I thought would be interested in that. That yielded zero results. I printed flyers, and I'd put them in people's mailboxes. Like I peppered areas. Like I probably put 100 or more flyers in people's mailboxes. Didn't get a single call back. I even went and knocked on people's doors. Dressed nice, had a flyer, had some business cards, had some pictures of what I wanted to do. And people don't like it when you knock on their door. They think you're a Jehovah's Witness. They think that you're some kind of evangelist. And so they're not really prepared to even listen to you, because it's like either you're raising money for some charity or you're evangelist. Like people don't like when you show up on their door. So that never yielded a single result. everything, all the land that I've acquired over the years has just been through building social equity and through word of mouth. I've never had, well, actually, that's not entirely true. My one lot that I have that you've been to, the one that doesn't have a house on it that's downtown, I did get that lot by approaching them, but I was already 4 years into my farming career at this point. They knew who I was. I had a lot of social equity behind me. People in the neighborhood knew who I was. So that was kind of a slam dunk. And that's the thing is, those types of opportunities become more possible when you do have that social equity. And I had, because I'd been in the newspapers, been in the radio station, been a commercial operating farm for 4 years previous. So it was a lot easier to approach it that way.
How big was that first piece of land that you started with?
That first lot, the entire lot was a half an acre. Two quarter-acre lots together. But there's a house, there's a workshop in there. Altogether, it was 6,000 square feet of production.
What was the timeline between there and you getting the next plot?
It was, just trying to think, what was the second plot? You know what? It was actually about a month. Like, I wasn't even farming it at that point, and I acquired another plot. It was funny because I had that main plot, and then I remember being at this store, and I ran into an old high school teacher of mine, super nice guy that I really admired back then, still admire today. And he just asked me what I was up to, and I told him about what I was doing. He was like, well, hey, I got this big yard. And so I was like, great, okay. And so that was the second plot that I acquired. And so that was about a month into preparing the first plot, building the fence. Like, there was no production happening at that point. So I started getting his plot ready then. And then from there, I almost acquired, when I think about it now, it would have been about August that year when I first started developing that first site. I almost acquired a plot every month for the whole winter. I took on so much land. I was even taking on new plots in April of my first year of farming. And in fact, April was when I acquired that plot that I was just telling you about, where they've asked me to expand onto. And so that first year I took on way too much land. And I highly advise people to not do that. It's best to go with a small amount first. Like, if somebody were to read my book or take my online course and really follow my methodology, like to the T, a farmer can make $50,000 on a quarter acre. Perhaps not their first year. In their first year, you could maybe do 30% of that. Your next year, if you're really good, you might do 100%, but realistically, then you'll do 60%. Then the third year, you could do 100% of that. But start with a quarter acre and just make that quarter acre as happening as possible. Because if you let things go astray, so what happened to me in my first year, and this is very typical of most newbie farmers, is they take on all this land, they get really ambitious, and then by July, like now, the weed pressure starts to come on heavy. Pest pressure and weed pressure start to come on. And then you start to panic because you're like, oh my God, weeds are 6 feet tall at this place, and there's birds and bugs eating this crop, and you just get overwhelmed. Whereas in the spring, it seems like you're managing it okay, because it's like, well, okay, yeah, it looks beautiful. There's rainfall. Everything looks good. We're cropping out. And then summertime comes, and then boom, you get punched in the face, like that Mike Tyson quote you had from last episode. You get slammed. And then that's when burnout really accelerates. And so that's why I tell people, start so small. The best way to set yourself up is if you don't have to do it as a full-time thing. If you can start part-time, manage a quarter acre with yourself and your spouse, or maybe a part-time employee or something like that, do that and make that quarter acre really happening, so that there's no weeds going to seed. There's no beds that have just become unmanageable. It's like it looks perfect, and then expand from there.
Well, here's the thought on that. Say somebody goes after the low-hanging fruit. Is there a minimum size which you think is even worth starting with? Because I could see a couple scenarios. One, they get 1,000 square feet and that's not worth it. And I'll see what you say. Or they get 5,000 square feet and they're thinking, okay, that's not a quarter acre, but I'm not there yet. So they hold off trying to get a second plot, and then that's taking time. And in the meantime, they're burning days on the calendar. So what's your thought in terms of, if you got at least this much to start with, it's better to start doing something than to just wait to get more? Like, is there a minimum viable square footage that works?
Yeah, but fundamentally what you just said is the absolute truth. It's just that it's better to just get something going and just make it happen. Like, there's that saying, ready, aim, shoot. Well, it's actually like shoot, aim, ready. Like, just go for it. Just make it happen, because you don't really have much to lose by just getting say somebody gives you 2,000 square feet. If you know you want to be a farmer, if you know that this is something that you're interested in doing, you don't really have that much to lose by just getting some production going. You know, even if you can't fully get into marketing in your first year, just be generous. Just give it to your friends, or start just a tiny specialized CSA program with your neighbors or something, just to get some production happening. Just get something going will just generate so much interest. Because, like you said too in the last episode, we talked about this quite a bit. It's just like, ultimately we're always in the business we're in the business of working with other human beings. And without those relationships, you know, you don't really have much to go on. So building the relationships is the most important thing. And you do that by having a place look beautiful. And then people go, wow, I love that. I want to be part of that. How can I help you? Hey, I've got a backyard, or can I work for you, or whatever it is. Can I share things with you? Like, it's really serendipitous, because people love seeing things grow. And, you know, once you get the ball rolling, it's just so many other opportunities open up. So I would say, yeah, if you want to farm commercially and that's your ambition right out of the gate, 5,000 square feet isn't bad. That's 1/8 of an acre. That's not bad to start with. But, you know, if you want to make a good living at it, I'd say 1/4 acre is what I would start with. But don't, you know, if somebody gives you 2,000 square feet and you can't find any other land in the meantime, just start making that 2,000 square feet look happening. Just get a really kick-ass looking garden in there in the interim, and then, but in a year's time, you'll have more opportunities for sure.
When did you say you got your first plot, that 6,000 square feet?
That was about June 2009, and then started doing some things there in July that year, but we really started to break ground in August of 2009.
So when you first got that 6,000 square feet in June, what was the plan right then? Because you didn't know that all this land would suddenly come about. So you're just looking to start farming. You say, okay, great, I have the 6,000 square feet. What was going through your mind then in terms of what's next?
Oh, so many things. I just remember feeling so overwhelmed with possibilities. But the first thing I was thinking is, okay, I got this land, and I'm definitely not going to get production going in like the middle or the end of summer. That would just be pointless. So I was just like, okay, well, what can I do now where I could learn some things? Because I really didn't know anything. I had a pile of books. I had Elliot Coleman's, I had The New Organic Grower, I had John Jevons, How to Grow More Vegetables, I had the Rodale Organic Encyclopedia, I had Gaia's Garden, I had the permaculture text, the intro to permaculture. I had like a handful of books, but I still was like, I don't know anything in practicality, so I just thought, well, you know, why don't I just start making some compost, because then I could learn about soil. So that was the first thing I did. So in that summer, I actually started doing this before I started to do any major work on the land, because we built a fence, and I had a friend help me do that, and it took quite a while because it was a big fence. It was like a fence around a half an acre. So he wasn't able to start helping me with that until the like August. So before that time, I put some compost bins in there. I just got some wood pallets, and I made a series of compost bins, and I started collecting compost from people, and people were calling me the compost kid, and I was just like biking around, and I was picking up, I had that summer off because I'd been tree planting that whole season, and I had a good amount of money saved, so I was pretty comfortable not working for that period of time and the winter, just focusing on educating myself on how to farm. And so I'd spent a lot of time watching YouTube videos and reading, and my main thing was like, hey, I want to learn composting. So I just built these bins, and I just went to an ice cream parlor, and I got these 5-gallon buckets from them, and I just gave them to all of my friends and said, just give me your vegetable scraps, and I'll pick them up once a week on my bike, and I'll just make stuff to compost. And then so that kind of grew, and then I had friends that worked at restaurants, and one friend worked at a health food store, and I was picking up juice grounds, which was great stuff for compost. And I was just making compost. And I did that for an entire winter, and it was funny because that grew into, it built a lot of hype about the farm. You know, I wasn't farming at the time, but everybody knew me as this compost kid that I'm like biking around. I was hardly a kid. I was still, almost 30 at the time, but that's what people were calling me. And I was biking around picking up compost, and I was on CBC radio, and I was in the newspaper, and people were like, hey, this person's doing this. But every time I was in those media channels, I would always plug my urban farm and say, yeah, this is what I'm doing now, but this is going to be an urban farm. And in the fall that year, I had all the plots turned over, the grass removed, and I had fall rye planted there as a green manure crop. And so I was showing people and bringing people around, and I was having, old ladies were calling me up to come and speak at their garden club, do a talk at their garden club. And I'm talking to these master gardeners about farming, and I'm like, I don't know anything about farming at that time. I'm just telling people about what I plan to do.
I think you could say some of the master gardeners don't as well.
Yeah, probably. So, but that's kind of what happened at that phase.
When you look back at it, was there any, I don't want to say mistakes, but learning experiences or hurdles that if you had to start over, you just wouldn't have focused on certain things that you did do? Like you mentioned fall rye there. I don't think you do cover crops at all now.
I don't, because I just don't have time to do them anymore. Because I push my season right to the edge, so I don't have time to establish cover crops. So, some organic gardeners might gasp to hear me say this, but I think they're a waste of time. At least for my farm, because I still put high amounts of organic matter into my soil. I don't have a problem doing that, but the time it takes to seed it and then mow it and turn it over, and then you've got a bit of it coming back when you plant your crop after it. It's just, I never really saw much of a benefit from it. Putting tons of compost in the soil seemed to be a better approach for me. So I definitely wasted a lot of hours doing that. One thing too I wasted a lot of time on was just turning my soil too much. I remember the first season, I was double digging my beds, like John Jevons style, double digging my beds. And it was suicide. It was absolute suicide. I remember being out there in July, turning these beds over by hand and just killing myself doing it. I'd spend an hour or more turning one bed over, and it was insane. So, and again, I barely saw a benefit to that. My no-till method that I use now is far more productive. It's faster, and I think it treats the soil better than actually going in and turning things around with a shovel. So those are two things I can think of off the top of my head, but there's a long list of them.
One thing, at least from my experience of talking to you, that I think accidentally worked out really well for you is getting the plots later in the season so you didn't start farming them right away. Like, I think getting plots in the fall and being able to prep them over the winter takes a lot of pressure off of having to convert a plot and feel the pressure to go right into production if you were to acquire a plot in February, March, April.
Yeah, that is the best way to do it. And that's one thing I wouldn't change about the way I did it. I was very happy with how I approached it at the beginning, is that I did so much prep in the previous year, which really made things easy in the spring. Because in my first year of farming, I mean, my season started later than it would have, just because I didn't have a lot of season extension equipment at that point. But I was making a living as a farmer right out of the gate without any experience. Just worked my ass off and suffered because of that. But I was making a living my first week of farming. I started making an income of about $500 a week by the second or third week of May, that first year of farming. Right away I had cash flow. And at that point I was only selling at farmers markets. But I had cash flow. I was making money, and because I had that main plot, because that was my first plot was what had production happening on it immediately, because I'd done so much prep in the fall. It saved me a lot of problems at the beginning, because I could just direct seed right into the ground. I mean, I also went way overboard with transplants that year too. That was one thing that I wouldn't do now is, I was transplanting spinach and arugula and lettuce, and I was like, oh, this is crazy. Whereas I could have direct seeded a lot of those crops and they would have been ready at the same time anyways. So, yeah, it definitely is ideal to get a lot of prep done in the fall or summer of the previous year.
I'm really glad you mentioned there that you're making cash flow right away, income right away, because that seems to be something that I've heard come up a lot through various venues lately around this whole idea of farming, is that it doesn't pay out of the box and it takes time. And people, for some reason, who want to go into farming see capital or lack of capital as a barrier to entry to farming. And it's a bit mystifying to me, because I think, one, a lot of these crops yield cash flow very fast. I mean, not on the first day, but within 60 days for sure, you can have a lot of stuff paying back. And the actual capital costs to start doing what you're doing are extremely low for any business. And I think people expect us to get into this on a $100 budget. And it's like, I just want to say, like, you're not going to start any business of size with no money. You're going to have to put some money into it. But in terms of businesses on a scale, you can start doing this for so cheap relative to what you could potentially make out of it at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah. I have dozens of friends that are restaurateurs and entrepreneurs of all types. And there's no business that I've ever seen, except maybe a couple tech business anomalies where somebody had a really slick idea and got it right off the bat and turned that into fast cash flow. There's very few businesses that can do that like this type of farming can. I mean, you want to start a restaurant, you're looking at least $100,000 in upfront capital, and you might not make a dime for 2 years. You might break even for 2 years, and or just pay not even pay yourself, but pay employees and your rent. Most other businesses, it's the same thing. So to rototill a couple yards up, that might cost you in total expenses of, say, for your irrigation, your input costs, the time it takes to prep those plots. Maybe it costs you, let's just be really generous and overestimate, maybe it costs you $500 to prep a couple 2,000 square foot plots. To get those into production and be having those make $10,000 each in a season, there's very few businesses can do that.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think that you really did yourself a favor, purposely or not, by saving on money from tree planting, had relatively low expenses, so you went in without having the pressure to provide cash flow on day one, take some of that pressure off, Because I think people who are trying to transition from other careers, and they're either saddled with some debt or life is just chewing up a lot of their cash flow, they don't have a few $1,000s to put into it. And it's like if you can't do the work ahead of time to set yourself up for success before you even start farming by building up some savings, then I think trying to cut expenses and save and skimp your way to success is never going to happen if you can't do that first step of setting yourself up for success to begin with. Yeah,
and that's why the best way to get into farming is to not buy land. The best way. If you're interested in farming and you want to get into farming, erase buying land from your mind. Just completely forget about that. Buying land isn't a bad thing, but if you want to start farming fast, just go into either, if you're not urban, go into some kind of lease agreement, or if you're urban, do backyards or whatever it is like I'm doing in neighborhoods. Start farming that way. Do not buy land, because I've seen so many farmers, or not necessarily farmers, people who romanticize agriculture. They take out a $250,000 mortgage or more, buy a piece of raw land, put $50,000 into getting that land happening, and putting in irrigation, drilling a well, you name it, and then they realize 6 months in that they don't like farming, or that they're not very good at it. And then, okay, wow, you just spent $300,000 to try to figure out if you like to farm or not.
Totally, and I think one of the keys that a lot of people need to figure out is put this into context. Why do you want to buy land? Because, no joke, most of the emails that I get about struggles that people have of getting into this or a homesteading, permacultural lifestyle is lack of capital to buy land. And it's, okay, what is the context for why you want to buy land? I get there's reasons for buying land, having independence, having a hard asset that, protects you if things happen. But if you want to farm as a career and that's what you want to do, then I don't know, like you said, that the requirement to own land is there.
Well, my advice to some people, if you want to make yourself feel better about not owning land, I had this hang up for many years, is kind of being depressed to think oh man, I had this victim mentality, my family is just working class, my parents won't co-sign a mortgage for me, I can never buy land. And I was all hung up on that. Well, the reality is, and the irony here is that I have bought a place, but the reality is you don't own land. Even if you own a piece of land outright in the traditional sense, or say you don't have a mortgage or whatever, you don't own anything. The government owns it all. You have to pay, we're renting land from the government. We have to pay tax on that land. If you don't pay tax, that land will be taken from you. So nobody owns anything. So for me at least, this is what helped me become comfortable with the idea that I might not ever be a landowner. And then I have become one, but, it's just I don't own it at all. Maybe there's some conveniences in the sense that I have the title to this land, and so now I can do with it whatever I want, as long as it doesn't piss off the neighbors. But that's the thing too. If it pisses off the neighbors, then that opens up a whole other can of possibilities that could get you off that land anyway. So, I don't know, I think it helps to have a more realistic idea of what land ownership actually means, and don't get too hung up on it, because none of us own anything anyways. If you don't pay your taxes, the government will come and take it away from you.
I'm with you, and one trick that's always worked for me is to think about, are you even maximizing the land that you do have access to? Because I think there's this humanistic thing to always want more, I got to control more land. And I see that, and I look at the land I have, and it's well, am I using that to its fullest potential? And I think a lot of people, it's I have an acre, I wish I had 10 acres. I have 10 acres, I wish I had 100. I have a quarter acre, I wish I had 1. And if you really sit down and say, am I totally maxing out what I do have. If you can honestly answer yes, then, well, maybe you can make a case for having more. But I think your case in point of you've been doing this for into your 6th year now, you're always getting more productive, and you're actually shedding land, not taking more on. So instead of always thinking about having to have more land or get more, it's just focus on what you have and really crush it with that. And then I think that takes some of the pressure off of I have to own it or I got to get more.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's some kind of beautiful old cliche quote in there about making the most of what you got. I mean, you know, it's always the grass is greener on the other side kind of thing. But that's absolutely true. And it's still even true for me today. I can grow. I mean, there's definitely a glass ceiling at some point that you will maximize, that you will hit at a certain point with the size of land. But I've been able to grow my business pretty steadily for the last 3 years without taking on more land. In fact, I grew my business from year 4 to year 5. I doubled my income from that year, from year 4 to year 5, by getting rid of 2 acres of land. I went from 2.5 acres to 1/3 of an acre, and I doubled my income. So there's definitely a lot to be said about maximizing, just like you said there, about using every opportunity you can with that land and making it the best, the most productive. And there's always looking through the permaculture lens of just stacking functions and trying to utilize as much of that space as you can. I mean, I do that with everything I do on my farm, stacking functions in the greenhouses, verticalizing things, understanding the cycles of crops so that, you know, before a summer crop goes in by mid-May, well, I can have 1 or 2 crops that grow well in the spring before that crop even goes in the ground. And then once that crop goes in the ground, I can interplant that crop with short cycle crops that won't interfere with its growth because they'll be out of the ground before that crop gets big enough to take over. So I've found so many ways to overlap and stack functions and verticalize that I don't need to have more land. And having said that, I've done all of those things now. And so now I'm thinking, you know what, maybe we'll go to a 1/2 acre for next year.
And you have the experience now to do that. And I think a lot of people, and this is a human trait, I think, that they overestimate what they think they can do. They underestimate how long they think stuff will take, and they underestimate how much stuff costs, and it comes down to a lot of time. You may want to take on more, and by you, I don't just mean you, I mean anybody, but it's can you take on more and still maintain the effectiveness and efficiency with which you are managing less? And if you're taking on more and you're becoming less efficient and less effective, is the net gain there worth it, or would you have been better taking less? You know, it's that incremental gain. Does going from 1/3 of an acre to 1/2 an acre, does that justify the incremental bump and overall everything? Well-being, how much you enjoy farming, the revenue that you're turning out, and the hassle, like do you have to take on staff, et cetera, to go do that?
Well, yeah, and I'm sure there's a fancy graph that you learn if you study economics in university, which I never did. But I'm sure something like that exists in general business economics, that there is a spot where if you increase production, you increase your overhead by X amount, and then it might take X amount of years to amortize that expansion in your overhead. And I see that in businesses a lot of the time, farms and just traditional businesses, is that they at one spot they'll be making really good money, and then they're thinking, okay, well, you know, it's time to grow, and then they grow, and then they discover, holy crap, we're making way less money and working more now. But then there's sort of this gradual curve there that if you maintain that, and because you have to discover all of the efficiencies and systems of that new position that you're at, and so you now have to kind of reorientate yourself, change your plan, change your model, and then work on that and then get that dialed. And then it might take a year or two to maximize that production. And then, okay, now you're making money again. And so it's just growing pains, I think. And I think it exists in every type of business, not just farming.
Yeah, like John Martin says, grow better, not bigger. And that, I think this is actually a good transition point, because next week I want to get into talking more about that 2-acre plot, the intricacies of what effect that had on your business, why you changed, different things you did on that, and it also ties into you going back east. You went back and visited JM, so I want to talk about some of the stuff that he's doing, but I think this makes a good transition point, so let's continue the early journey of your farming career next week by talking about that. Thanks for watching this episode of The Urban Farmer. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.